Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the forces reshaping the global energy landscape, from a 100-year-old prediction that's finally coming true, to oil shipments grinding to a halt in one of the world's most critical choke points.
And I'm Maya Clarity. We've also got a bizarre story out of Bolivia where a military cargo plane loaded with central bank cash crashed on a highway, killing at least 20 people and scattering banknotes across the wreckage. Plus, the hydrogen lobby just took a major hit, and Americans rushed to install solar panels at a rate nobody predicted. Buckle up, because these stories are more connected than they appear.
Let's start tonight with a story that spans a full century. IEEE Spectrum is reporting on Charles Proteus Steinmetz, a name that most people have never heard, despite the fact that this man was every bit the intellectual equal of Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. In fact, he counted both of them as personal friends, and in many ways, his contributions to alternating current power systems were more practically important than either of theirs.
Steinmetz was a fascinating figure, Alex. He was a German immigrant, a socialist, a man with a severe physical disability who became one of General Electric's most brilliant engineers. He essentially made AC power systems mathematically understandable. Before Steinmetz, engineers were basically guessing when they designed electrical systems. He gave them the mathematical tools to actually calculate what would happen in alternating current circuits, particularly with hysteresis losses in transformers and motors.
And here's where it gets really interesting for our audience tonight. According to IEEE Spectrum, Steinmetz made a prediction about electric vehicles over 100 years ago. This was a man who understood the power grid better than almost anyone alive at the time. He looked at the trajectory of electrical technology and saw that electric vehicles would eventually dominate transportation. This was in the early 1920s, when gasoline-powered cars were just beginning their takeover.
Think about what that means. A man who literally helped build the modern power grid, who understood electricity at a level most of us can't comprehend, looked at the landscape and said the future belongs to electric vehicles. And he was right. He was just a century ahead of his time. The internal combustion engine took a 100-year detour, and we're only now arriving at the destination Steinmetz foresaw.
What's particularly striking is the reason Steinmetz believed in EVs. It wasn't about climate change, which wasn't on anyone's radar in the 1920s. It was about efficiency. He understood, better than anyone, that electric motors convert energy to motion far more efficiently than combustion engines. He saw that the grid infrastructure being built across America could eventually support electric transportation. The engineering logic was always there.
And this raises a question that I think is deeply uncomfortable for the fossil fuel industry. If one of the greatest electrical engineers who ever lived predicted, a century ago, that EVs were the logical future, what exactly have we been doing for the last 100 years? The answer, of course, is that the oil industry built one of the most powerful lobbying machines in human history. Steinmetz saw the future, and the petroleum industry spent 100 years making sure it didn't arrive on time.
It's worth noting that Steinmetz wasn't some dreamer in a lab. He held over 200 patents. He was General Electric's chief consulting engineer. When there was a complex problem with a power system anywhere in the country, Steinmetz was the person they called. His famous story about charging General Electric $10,000 to fix a problem, with the invoice reading $1 for making the chalk mark, $9,999 for knowing where to make it, tells you everything about the man's genius.
So the takeaway from this story isn't just historical trivia. It's that the transition to electric vehicles isn't some radical new idea cooked up by Silicon Valley. It's a return to what the smartest engineers understood a century ago. Every year that we delayed this transition, we paid for it in emissions, in health costs, in geopolitical entanglements with oil-producing nations. Which brings us perfectly to our next story.
Speaking of geopolitical entanglements, we have breaking news from the Strait of Hormuz tonight that should concern every single person watching this broadcast. Middle East Eye is reporting that large oil companies and major trading houses have suspended shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Let that sink in for a moment. The Strait of Hormuz is, without exaggeration, the most important choke point in the global energy system.
The numbers here are staggering, Alex. Roughly 20% of the world's total oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. We're talking about approximately 20 to 21 million barrels of oil per day flowing through a waterway that's only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. When major oil companies and trading houses stop sending tankers through that strait, it's not a minor disruption. It's a potential crisis.
And let's be clear about what's driving this. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. It's been a flashpoint for decades, but the current tensions appear to have escalated to the point where major companies have decided the risk to their tankers, their crews, and their cargo is simply too high. When companies like the world's largest oil traders are voluntarily leaving money on the table by halting shipments, you know the situation on the ground is extremely serious.
What concerns me most is the downstream effect. We're not just talking about oil prices spiking, though that will absolutely happen. We're talking about a global supply chain that runs on petroleum-based transportation. Every container ship, every freight truck, every cargo plane runs on fossil fuels. When the supply from the Persian Gulf gets disrupted, it ripples outward through the entire global economy within days. Food prices, manufacturing costs, transportation costs, everything goes up.
And here's the connection I want our viewers to make. Go back to what Steinmetz was saying 100 years ago. If we had followed the logical path that the greatest electrical engineers foresaw, if we had built our transportation system around electricity rather than petroleum, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight watching global commerce tremble because of tensions in a waterway halfway around the world. Our energy dependence on the Persian Gulf is a choice, not an inevitability.
Exactly right. Every barrel of oil that flows through the Strait of Hormuz represents a strategic vulnerability. And the oil industry has not only profited from that vulnerability, they've actively lobbied against the alternatives that would reduce it. The same companies now suspending shipments have spent decades fighting electric vehicle mandates, renewable energy subsidies, and grid modernization efforts. They created the dependency, and now we all pay the price when it's disrupted.
I also want to point out who benefits from these disruptions. When oil supply tightens, prices spike, and the oil companies that still have supply available see their profits soar. There's a perverse incentive structure in the global oil market where instability actually rewards the major players, at least in the short term. The ones who suffer are ordinary consumers who watch their energy bills and gas prices climb.
And the geopolitical dimension is critical here. The fact that we're seeing major trading houses pull back from the strait suggests that intelligence assessments behind the scenes are probably more alarming than what's being reported publicly. Oil traders don't leave billions of dollars on the table unless they have very good reason to believe the risks are extreme. We should all be paying very close attention to what happens in this region over the coming days.
Now let's shift to a story that sounds almost too bizarre to be real, but it is very much real and very much tragic. The Guardian is reporting that at least 20 people have been killed after a military cargo plane carrying banknotes from Bolivia's central bank crashed while attempting to land near the capital. The plane struck vehicles on a highway and scattered bills across the wreckage site.
This story is devastating on multiple levels, Alex. First, the human toll. At least 20 dead, dozens more injured. This was a highway, meaning ordinary people were driving to work, running errands, living their lives when a military aircraft loaded with cash came down on top of them. And then, in the immediate aftermath, while bodies lay in the wreckage, people rushed to the crash site to collect the banknotes blowing across the ground.
Footage from local media showed scenes that are almost impossible to process. People scrambling through wreckage that had just killed their fellow citizens, grabbing fistfuls of banknotes while police in riot gear tried to secure the site with tear gas. Riot police had to use tear gas to disperse people gathering around the wreckage of a plane that had just killed 20 people. That image alone tells you something profound about economic desperation in Bolivia.
And we need to ask the harder questions here. Why was a military cargo plane being used to transport banknotes from the central bank? This is a practice that happens in countries where the financial infrastructure is underdeveloped or where the government doesn't trust civilian logistics chains with large amounts of currency. It speaks to deeper institutional weaknesses in Bolivia's financial system.
Bolivia has been going through severe economic turbulence. The country's foreign currency reserves have been depleted, there have been fuel shortages, and the government has been under enormous financial pressure. So when you see a military plane being pressed into service to move physical currency, you're seeing a symptom of a much larger economic crisis. The cash on that plane wasn't just money, it was a lifeline for a government struggling to keep its financial system functioning.
And the energy connection here is direct. Bolivia's economy has historically been heavily dependent on natural gas exports. As gas production has declined and global energy markets have shifted, Bolivia's revenue base has eroded. The economic crisis that led to a military plane hauling cash is, in part, a resource curse story. When your entire economy is built on extracting and selling hydrocarbons, you're one market shift away from catastrophe.
The scenes of people rushing to collect banknotes from a crash site that killed 20 people should haunt all of us. It's a visceral image of what happens when economic systems fail, when people are so desperate that the risk of running into active wreckage seems worth it for a handful of bills. This is what resource dependency looks like when it collapses. It's not an abstract policy discussion. It's people dying and other people so impoverished they'll risk their own lives for scattered cash.
And I think we have to note the grim irony here. Bolivia sits on some of the world's largest lithium reserves, a resource that's absolutely critical for the battery technology powering the energy transition. The same country that's suffering from the decline of its gas economy could potentially benefit enormously from the clean energy transition, if it can develop those lithium resources in a way that actually benefits its own people rather than just multinational mining corporations.
That's a crucial point, Maya. Bolivia has been at the center of lithium geopolitics for years. The question has always been whether the country can leverage its natural resources for genuine economic development, or whether it will simply swap one form of extraction and dependency for another. Today's tragedy underscores how urgent that question is.
Now let's turn to a story that cuts right to the heart of the energy transition debate. CleanTechnica has published a detailed analysis titled The System Case Against Hydrogen for Grid Storage, and it's a devastating takedown of one of the fossil fuel industry's favorite talking points.
For years, the hydrogen lobby has been pushing the idea that green hydrogen is essential for long-duration energy storage on the grid. Their argument goes like this: solar and wind are intermittent, batteries can only store energy for a few hours, so we need hydrogen to bridge the gaps when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow for extended periods. It sounds logical on the surface. The problem is, when you actually run the numbers, hydrogen for grid storage is a spectacularly wasteful proposition.
The efficiency problem is the core issue, and it's damning. When you use electricity to make hydrogen through electrolysis, store that hydrogen, and then convert it back to electricity through a fuel cell or turbine, you lose roughly 60 to 70% of the original energy. That means for every 100 kilowatt-hours of renewable electricity you put in, you only get about 30 to 40 kilowatt-hours back out. Compare that to lithium-ion batteries, which round-trip at about 85 to 90% efficiency.
According to CleanTechnica's analysis, this efficiency gap isn't just a minor inconvenience. It fundamentally changes the economics of the entire energy system. If you're losing 2/3 of your energy in the hydrogen conversion process, you need to build 2 to 3 times more renewable generation capacity just to make up for the losses. That means more solar panels, more wind turbines, more land use, more investment, all to compensate for the inherent wastefulness of the hydrogen pathway.
And the article specifically takes aim at Germany's push to force the European Union to double its green hydrogen and synthetic fuel quotas. This is a country that's been heavily influenced by its industrial gas lobby, companies that have existing infrastructure for producing, transporting, and storing hydrogen and would love to see massive public subsidies flow their way. Follow the money, and the hydrogen hype starts making a lot more sense.
The real question, as CleanTechnica frames it, is what happens when you need long-duration storage, the kind that gets you through a week-long period of low wind and solar output. The hydrogen advocates claim this is their territory, the one place where batteries can't compete. But the analysis argues that the actual need for multi-day storage is far smaller than the hydrogen industry claims, and there are multiple alternatives that are more efficient.
Right. Options like compressed air energy storage, flow batteries, gravity-based storage, pumped hydro, and simply overbuilding renewable capacity with shorter duration batteries can address most of the long-duration storage challenge at far lower cost and far higher efficiency. The dirty secret of the hydrogen for storage argument is that it depends on inflating the amount of long-duration storage the grid actually needs, which conveniently creates a bigger market for the hydrogen industry's products.
And let's call this what it is. The push for hydrogen in grid storage is, in many cases, a Trojan horse for the natural gas industry. Most hydrogen produced today is gray hydrogen, made from natural gas through steam methane reforming. The gas industry loves the idea of a hydrogen economy because it keeps them relevant. They can sell natural gas as the feedstock, use their existing pipeline infrastructure, and claim they're part of the clean energy transition. Meanwhile, the actual climate benefit is minimal or non-existent.
That CleanTechnica analysis is an important piece of systems-level thinking that cuts through the hype. When you model the entire energy system rather than looking at hydrogen in isolation, the case for hydrogen in grid storage largely evaporates. It's a solution looking for a problem, and the problem it finds is mostly one manufactured by its own advocates to justify massive public investment in their preferred technology.
Our final story tonight is one that should give everyone some genuine optimism, but also raise serious concerns about policy whiplash. Electrek is reporting, based on EnergySage's latest home electrification marketplace report, that U.S. residential solar installations surged by 205% in the months leading up to a tax credit reduction. 205%. That is an absolutely extraordinary number.
Let's put that in context. The federal investment tax credit for residential solar has been one of the most effective clean energy policies in American history. When homeowners know that a significant percentage of their solar installation cost will come back as a tax credit, the economics become compelling. What EnergySage's data shows is that as the deadline for the higher tax credit rate approached, Americans rushed to install solar panels at a rate that dwarfed anything the market had seen before.
And this wasn't just a quantitative surge, it was a qualitative transformation of the market according to the report. The types of systems being installed changed. Battery storage attachment rates climbed significantly as homeowners increasingly paired their solar panels with battery systems, recognizing that the combination of solar generation and on-site storage provides the most value and the most energy independence.
That's a critical trend, Alex. When a homeowner installs solar panels alone, they're still dependent on the grid during nighttime and cloudy periods. But when they add battery storage, they become substantially more energy independent. They can store excess solar generation during the day and use it at night. They have backup power during outages. They can even arbitrage electricity rates, charging during cheap periods and using stored power during expensive peak hours.
The 205% surge tells us something crucial about consumer behavior and energy policy. Americans are not resistant to clean energy. When the economics are right, when the incentives are clear, they will adopt solar and battery technology at staggering rates. The bottleneck has never been consumer willingness. It's always been policy certainty and economic incentive. Give people a clear financial reason and a deadline, and they'll act.
But here's the concerning part. What happens after the tax credit reduction? EnergySage data almost certainly shows a classic boom and bust pattern. Installations surge before the deadline, then collapse afterward as the economics shift. This kind of policy-driven volatility is terrible for the solar industry. Installers hire aggressively to meet the rush demand, then have to lay off workers when demand craters. Manufacturers can't plan production effectively. Supply chains whipsaw between shortage and oversupply.
And who benefits from that volatility? Not consumers, not solar workers, not the climate. The beneficiaries are the fossil fuel interests who have pushed for these tax credit reductions in the first place. Every time the solar market crashes after a subsidy cliff, opponents of clean energy use it as evidence that solar can't stand on its own. They create the instability through policy changes and then point to that instability as proof that the technology is unreliable. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, by design.
The EnergySage report also reveals just how dramatically the market has matured. System prices have come down, equipment quality has improved, and financing options have expanded. The residential solar and storage market of today is fundamentally different from what it was even 5 years ago. The technology works, the economics work when properly incentivized, and consumers clearly want it. The only thing holding it back is political interference driven by fossil fuel lobbying.
And I want to connect this back to our Steinmetz story. 100 years ago, one of the most brilliant engineers in American history looked at the electrical system and saw a future powered by clean electricity. Today, millions of American homeowners are trying to build exactly that future on their rooftops. The 205% surge in solar installations isn't just a market statistic. It's a democratic vote for the energy future that Steinmetz envisioned, expressed through consumer purchasing decisions.
That's a powerful connection. Now let's step back and look at what all 5 of these stories tell us together, because the pattern is unmistakable. We have a century-old prediction about electric vehicles finally coming true. We have the global oil system showing its fundamental fragility in the Strait of Hormuz. We have a country devastated by resource dependency crashing military planes full of cash. We have the hydrogen lobby trying to slow the transition with inefficient technology. And we have American consumers choosing clean energy at record rates when given the chance.
The through line connecting every one of these stories is the century-long battle between distributed, electric, renewable energy and centralized, combustion-based fossil fuel energy. Steinmetz saw the future in the 1920s. The oil industry spent 100 years delaying it. The Strait of Hormuz shows us the geopolitical cost of that delay. Bolivia shows us the human cost of resource dependency. The hydrogen debate shows us the current tactics being used to slow the transition. And the solar surge shows us that when people are given the tools and incentives, they choose clean energy overwhelmingly.
What strikes me is how each story illuminates a different dimension of the same fundamental transformation. The Steinmetz story is about technological foresight. The Hormuz story is about geopolitical vulnerability. The Bolivia crash is about economic fragility. The hydrogen debate is about corporate misdirection. And the solar surge is about consumer demand. They're all facets of the same diamond. The world is moving from fossil fuels to electricity, and every force that tries to slow that transition creates collateral damage.
And the scale of that collateral damage is what keeps me up at night. 20 people dead in Bolivia because a resource-dependent economy is collapsing. Global oil markets in turmoil because our entire energy supply depends on a 21-mile-wide waterway. Communities across America whipsawed by boom-and-bust solar policy driven by fossil fuel lobbying. These aren't abstract problems. These are real people paying real costs for a transition that should have happened decades ago.
The hydrogen story is particularly instructive because it shows how the delay tactics have evolved. The fossil fuel industry is no longer just denying climate change outright, though some still do. They've gotten more sophisticated. Now they promote solutions like hydrogen for grid storage that sound green but actually perpetuate dependence on natural gas infrastructure. It's the same goal, keeping fossil fuels in the energy system, wrapped in a shinier package.
And yet, despite all of these obstacles, the transition is happening. It's happening because the physics and the economics are on the side of renewable electricity, just as Steinmetz understood a century ago. It's happening because consumers, when given the choice, choose solar panels and batteries and electric vehicles. It's happening because engineers and entrepreneurs keep driving down costs and improving technology. The question isn't whether the transition will happen. It's how much damage will be done by those trying to slow it down.
That's the story we'll keep covering here at Truth Report. The energy transition is the defining story of our time, and it touches everything: geopolitics, economics, technology, justice, and the daily lives of billions of people. Every one of tonight's stories is a chapter in that larger narrative, and we're committed to following every thread wherever it leads.
Before we go tonight, I want to leave our viewers with one image. Charles Proteus Steinmetz, a man who stood barely 4 feet tall due to a spinal condition, who fled political persecution in Germany, who arrived in America with almost nothing and became one of the most important engineers in history. That man looked at the world 100 years ago and told us what the future should look like. We owe it to his legacy, and to the 20 people who died on a Bolivian highway today, and to every community suffering under the weight of fossil fuel dependency, to build that future as fast as we possibly can.
Well said, Alex. To our viewers, follow the money, follow the energy, and follow the truth. That's what we do here every single day. The sources for tonight's stories include IEEE Spectrum, Middle East Eye, The Guardian, CleanTechnica, and Electrek's coverage of the Energy Sage Home Electrification Marketplace report. We'll have links on our website so you can dig into the details yourselves.
Because an informed public is the most powerful force on Earth. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. This has been Truth Report. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and we'll see you next time.
Good night, everyone.